started, just want to make sure everyone can access the presentation if they would like to follow along on their own computer. In the chat, I'm putting these links that you can see for the live stream, for the presentation, and for if you need captions. So you have those options if you need them. If you lose this at any time today, just put a message in the chat and I'll resend the links.
And Jared, just to add, captions can also be found if you don't want to use the link. It can also be found if you click the closed caption icon at the bottom of your screen and then click show subtitles. You can find it there as well. And just bear with us. We're trying out a new captioning program. So we're still working on seeing how accurate it is. So, but overall, it's done a pretty good job so far.
Yeah, thanks for helping us test it.
Yeah, this is Ronald Marsh. Can everybody see me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering why my camera is not working, but that's okay. I can hear you.
All right, Lisa, can you advance the slide for us? Thank you. So this is our agenda today, and we'll start off with Mike Solomon, the VA CEC president.
Hey, my name is Mike Solomon, the president of the Virginia Council for Exceptional Children. Once again, thank you everybody for coming today. Thank you for the Virginia Department of Education, Ms. Hollins and everybody for presenting on this panel today. It's been a fun experience, and I think there's gonna be a lot of really good information here today.
Lisa, can you advance the slide so we can see about CEC?
Again, we're always looking for membership, things like that. A lot of great materials, information, and yeah, that's it.
Thanks. Okay, well, my name is Mindy Gumpert, and I'm the president of the Virginia Council for Learning Disabilities. I'd like to thank you all for spending your Saturday or Friday afternoon with us after probably a very, very long week. So we really appreciate your attendance today, and I'd like to welcome you all to our second webinar. We're very excited to collaborate with the Virginia Student Council or the Virginia Council for Exceptional Children on this series of webinars, because we just want to be a resource for educators in the state of Virginia. So we're out there trying to provide some information to you. And you know, what better way to do that than to bring in the experts, the folks from the Virginia Department of excuse me, Education will be presenting tonight, and they have some amazing resources to share with you. I've already seen the PowerPoint, and you're gonna love it. You're really in for a treat. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce Dr. Samantha Hollins. She's the Assistant Superintendent for the Department of Education and Student Services. I emailed Dr. Hollins with an idea for the webinar, and within a week she had amassed this dream team, sent me the PowerPoint, and you know, she's ready to rock and roll. So I would like to personally thank Dr. Hollins and her colleagues for volunteering their time on a Friday afternoon for you all, for the educators of Virginia. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And you all are in for a treat. Take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Mindy. And I just want to echo the thoughts from our collaborators, both at VCLD and CEC, on how excited the Department of Education is to be with you this afternoon. Being a former special education teacher myself, I can only imagine the state of mind you're in this late on a Friday. And the fact that you all are spending your very valuable time with us just speaks so much to the dedication of our educators across the Commonwealth. So first, I just want to say thank you for being with us. It's our hope to provide a couple of tools for your toolbox and some information that can assist you during these really unprecedented times. And we know those bring fresh challenges for, you know, already pretty big issues that we're dealing with in public education, whether you're an administrator, a central office leader, a teacher, an instructional aide, or a parent or an advocate. We know that the information that we provide tonight hopefully will provide a little bit of detail around some of these situations, and most importantly, help to equip folks with some supports and resources that they can find useful and hopefully helpful in their day-to-day instruction. So the other thing I want to know is that we're so proud to be working with VCLD and CEC, two organizations that have a storied past in really assisting educators directly. Here at the department, we've been super pleased over the last 2 years to work hand in hand with the Council for Exceptional Children to support first-year special education teachers in the Commonwealth. And I think that is just such a great resource. And our governor, as well as our state superintendent of public instruction, see that as so important in making sure that we're reaching out and providing the much needed support to our early career professionals, and hopefully throughout their career being an area that they can access resources and support from. So please don't hesitate either during this webinar or following to contact myself or my colleagues at the department who are joining me this evening. And I definitely don't consider myself an expert, but the team that I put together for you guys today brings so much expertise and content knowledge. I think that this will be such a great opportunity for you to hear directly from them. And so I will allow for each of them to introduce themselves and share their role with you as they transition into their sections. But I just want to take a few moments to give you a little bit of a broad, comprehensive update from the Virginia Department of Education. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the resources that the State Department of Education provides to local school divisions. And, you know, we've been working very closely, obviously, with the Office of the Governor and the Virginia Health Department to provide some much needed resources during this time. And if we transition to the next slide, I think it's important to note, I see a lot of familiar names on our participant list, folks that are from various school divisions within the Commonwealth. I see some familiar names from our folks that service our training and technical assistance centers across the Commonwealth. And so I just want to remind you all that as the state education agency, we are charged with providing training, technical assistance, and support and resources for the 132 public school divisions within the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so whether you're joining us from Virginia Beach, from Bath County, from Greensville, or from Fairfax, we are here to provide that support to your locality. And as you can imagine, given the pandemic that we're experiencing, as well as the last few months and an approach to reopening, that lens can look really different for each of the divisions across the Commonwealth. And so I just want to give a little bit of context that sometimes as a department, we tend to sound more general and kind of comprehensive in what we can say. And that's very mindful because our answers have to fit the situations across the various school divisions and really be, I think, responsive to some of the differences that you're seeing. One resource that I've shared here is our COVID-19 in Virginia Public Schools link. And I know you guys are going to be provided a copy of this presentation after our time today. I think that's really useful because there are a couple of really great resources here, I think, that could be of use to you. If you click on this link, you'll see that it'll take you to our homepage. And one of the buttons that is there is called our State Snapshot. And it actually highlights what's happening in the state and what those different approaches look like. So it's right here at the bottom, it's that last bullet. The State Snapshot will show you a picture of Virginia, and what it does is it highlights the different instructional models that are being used. And so you can find your locality on the map and identify obviously what instructional model you're using, but it also can show you neighboring counties as well as regional, and you can see there are definitely some patterns throughout the state, with the majority of our school divisions really swinging towards virtual or remote learning, and then also with a smaller number at this point being in person. What I will tell you in having conversations with superintendents pretty much every week is that this is in a constant state of flux. And so this information will continue to be updated. You can see that at the top of the screen, but there is definitely a willingness to try as much as we can, as safely as we can, to transition to more in-person services for students, staff, and parents. And so if we go back to the main website, you'll see that there are lots of resources here that can provide updates and information. There's a great school reopening frequently asked questions document that really talks a lot about some of the resources that are available. I think something for us as special educators to be concerned about is obviously thinking about some of the mitigation strategies that we're using, things like social distancing, things like masks, things like personal protective equipment. Obviously, that can be a challenge for many of the students that we work with. When I was teaching, I was working with students with low incidence disabilities, particularly in the area of autism and intellectual disabilities. And so I can think of some of the students that I worked with that wearing a mask all day would be a huge challenge for them. And so we provided some guidance on how to utilize health mitigation strategies, but also how to use adaptations and alternatives to that when it might not be possible. Another piece of information that the state has provided in tandem with the governor's office is our reopening guidance, or our phased guidance for reopening. And this information really kind of gives you the department's perspective on what the response to the pandemic should look like. And the one thing that I will point out is that it is a huge area of priority for both the governor, who is a physician himself, the state superintendent of public instruction, who has been a teacher, an administrator, and a superintendent to make sure that we're doing what's the most safe for our staff, students, and families, and also thinking about some of our students in vulnerable populations. And of course, students with disabilities are among one of those key demographics that we know the school closures had a significant impact on. And so what you'll see reflected in this guidance is the state really pushing for the group of students in order to receive in-person services are really identified, at that first phase are special education students. And so thinking that, if we're going to think about bringing a group of students back, even if in a measured way and with the most mitigation strategies we can, they really want school divisions to consider their more vulnerable populations. And students with disabilities is a huge area of priority for that. And you'll see that reflected in the guidance from the governor's office. If we go back to the presentation, I just want to, before I transition to the next slide, I am well aware, and I remember, being in a professional development seminar, just feeling like there was a never-ending wave of information that was crashing on me at all times. We try to be really cognizant of that and are aware that teachers primarily are getting so much information at such a fast pace that it really can be very challenging to kind of pick out the pieces and nuggets that mean the most to you and can be the most valuable. And one thing that I want to share with you is that all of the staff on this call, as well as others within Dr. Abrams' supervision, are contributing to a Gov Delivery newsletter. And there is a link at the bottom of this slide to sign up for it. And what it is a short burst that comes out every week with about 2 or 3 areas that really focus on special education instruction. So everything from a virtual webinar on virtual co-teaching, to support for speech language therapists who are working virtually, to, hey, how can I apply for a grant for assistive technology for a group of students that I'm working with? So one thing I want to encourage you to do before you sign off today is just access this link and sign up for our Gov Delivery. We really pride ourselves on making sure we're getting a really bite-sized chunk of good information out directly to teachers, and so that they have the ability to link up with some great professional development, opportunities for resources, and support from the state education agency. A couple of other areas that I want to point your attention to, and this is really a great thing, a resource for our special education administrators, our folks who serve as coordinators or instructional support to keep in mind, is that we have developed an array of guidance documents that help to support folks in the field. So if we transition to the next slide, I've provided some hyperlinks for just really our top 3 areas of guidance that we've seen been really helpful to the field. The first is that we have also developed a FAQ around special education specifically. So for those of you out there who are writing IEPs and having conversations about what does SAFE look like in a virtual setting, and how do I write an IEP for a hybrid schedule? What do I do if I'm seeking to provide teletherapy to students? What do I have to do when it comes to HIPAA and transparency of information that's shared in a virtual setting? This FAQ is a really great reference point to just direct you to your question or your area that you have some concerns about, and really kind of just walk you through some of the answers to consider and some information to take back. I also encourage you, if you're getting questions from folks, whether it be community members, parents, advocates, our state special education advisory committee, we've had a lot of opportunity to converse with those folks. And so those questions that we get in, we've been able to kind of cycle back into this document. And if any of us need help, it's in not recreating the wheel and making sure that we're getting good information out there to the field. So this FAQ is really special ed specific and can be useful in walking through some of those difficult topics. We also created an array of resources to talk about social emotional development and learning and support. We're well aware that the school closures have had big impacts for the kids that we work with, not just academically. And I say that that's also for our parents, families, and caregivers, as well as our staff themselves. So we've really tried to beef up our education and resources around how best to support your students, how to transition and support families who are now being thrust into the role of kind of that instructional support person at home, as well as the teachers that you're working with. So these documents can really be helpful as kind of a quick reference tool. And they're also really great to include in a newsletter or in a social media post that you're sharing with families. It's a great way to kind of get some resources out there and not have to recreate something. Speaking of interfacing with our parents and families, I think so many of us on this call are probably parents, grandparents, caregivers ourselves, and I think we can all attest that communication coming from our school division is really so important. And so maintaining that communication with families and making sure that we're looking at that lens of, is the information accessible for them? How are we providing answers to some of the questions they have? This parent guide does a great job of collecting some resources that you could use to provide families with some support and link them up with other agencies or organizations that may be able to support them in the challenging circumstances they find themselves. Everything from need for food to social emotional support to therapeutic interventions is contained within this document. Before I kind of get into the meat of what we're talking about today, I really want to say that it's not just about providing kind of the context of the situation that we're in, but as Mindy stated, you know, we knew that we were going to be talking with teachers today. And so we want to make sure that the bulk of our time is spent equipping you guys with support and information around how to kind of tackle the new challenges we find ourselves in. I think if we have heard anything from our teachers out in the field, and I'm looking at my staff now too, you know, it's about kind of tackling this new environment of virtual learning. How do we, you know, provide academic support? How do we provide social, emotional, and developmental support? How do we do behavior management in a virtual environment? And so that's what we want to spend our time discussing with you today. And so I've linked up a couple of resources here, but what I really want to do is transition us into our discussion for today. So as we go to the next slide, I want to hand it off to my very capable Director of the Office of Special Education and Instructional Services, Dr. Pat Abrams. And Pat is joined by 4 of her staff members today that really serve as the content area expertise and really the knowledge keepers of these areas that we want to bring to you today. A focus on how do we kind of move our teaching into the virtual environment, and how do we look at tackling some of the questions that you shared with Mindy and Mike as we prepared for this webinar today. And so I'm going to pause there. I'm going to be waiting in the wings for any questions that come at us. And I just want to say thanks again before I hand it off to Pat. And so Pat, I leave it in your very capable hands.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be with you tonight, or this afternoon. I guess it's earlier sunset than a few weeks ago, but I think it'll still be light when we end. But back up to the previous slide, please. Again, we provided you with links, and basically these, we did spend time, the staff that have expertise in areas of the disability, specific disabilities, such as the sensory disabilities, deaf, blind, ADD, learning disabilities, you know, the alphabet soup here, autism. This first document that's, these are links that's on the VDOE website, and Dr. Hollins showed you where you can find them. But the first one is actually a repository. And early on, well, relatively early on, we found that we were getting barraged by information from many other states. Go back up to the first slide, that previous slide. And so we went in and looked at a lot of resources. Some were you had to pay for, and some were free. And we did what we call a repository. So the Instructional Resources Supporting Students with Disabilities is a repository that's been compiled with people kind of picking and choosing the resources that we thought best addressed some of the very specific areas that us as teachers see every day. But we did organize, so we think these links are credible. That was one of the criteria we used to select them. But we also organized them by topics that in our teaching would have been valuable for us to easily search, and that would be in academics. And you'll hear a little bit about academics tonight with reading and mathematics specifically. Inclusive practices, which you'll hear a little bit about tonight as well. Assistive technology and access, social emotional, of course, and then very specifics for there weren't many of these around, but we dug in and found some for specifics for those of us and you that work with students with significant cognitive disabilities, and how in the world do you access and specifically engage those students in virtual instruction. Now, the next 3 links on this slide, you probably already know about if you're a teacher in Virginia. So TTAC Online is a link to the one-stop shopping, so to speak, open 24/7. And that's mostly used by paraprofessionals and teachers. When we look at the data of usage, really for the past 3 years, and prior to that, predominantly teachers and parents are heavily accessing more than just clicking, because we've got that data as well, and using especially the online training that's available. As you start to rack up your training, of course, as well as start to rack up your renewal points for renewing your license. The next one is AIM Virginia. That stands for the Accessible Instructional Materials Center. Again, it's free. The state provides money to fund that, and it provides accessible instructional materials to all Virginia K-12 students with IEPs. What's especially important during this time of virtual and hybrid, or certainly hybrid is going to be partially virtual, synchronous and asynchronous, is to visit. They've put up a special page that's a COVID-19 support page in the news and events. The last one on this slide is, of course, ACE, our Autism Center for Excellence. That is a university-based technical assistance and professional development research center that, again, those professional development, professional learning, again, open 24/7, especially for online learning and archived webinars, is again supported, funded by your state tax dollars and federal tax dollars, so take advantage of it. ACE, I think Daniel Irwin, who's going to be talking a little bit about behavior, manages that center, and he'll give us maybe some more specific information about what they've been doing on a regular basis during school closures as well as reopening. Next slide, please. As we talk about inclusive services and look at data around our students and their least restrictive environment that's on their IEPs, we always want to consider how are we accessing, how do we know that we can kind of guarantee or assure some access? And you as teachers and the various school divisions have to grapple with this. So what we did was found some examples of considerations for access. AEM is the Accessible Educational Materials Center, which is a broader national base from our AIM Center, specifically in Virginia. But that's run kind of oversaw, it's managed in an institution called CAST, which also provides UDL. CAST is the Center for Applied Special Technology. And in the document called Sustaining Inclusive Practices for Virtual Learning for Students with Disabilities, it's also linked here, I think, in the next slide. There are probably about 9 or 10 questions that school divisions ask themselves. Teachers ask themselves, work with your administrators and coordinators to ask yourselves about this basis of access so that you can engage students in virtual instruction. So just a few examples, if you go to the previous slide, of what you would see. And these are just 2 examples out of a list of 9 or 10 that you can kind of do a self-assessment and ask yourself, your families and your students, if every student can use the curriculum and instruction programs that are available. And specifically, how can they receive information from the device that they have? How will they interact with, express, and provide input? Those of you who recognize what that is from, those are the 3 elements of the Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. And what are the technological resources needed for educators and staff, students and families? Do all of the families have access to these resources? And then if not, here's your problem solving. How can the school division remedy the situation? So you're going to see they're pretty easy considerations for your team, your grade level team, or your principal and your central office team to kind of go through these about 9 questions there and see if you can kind of get the foundation for all the students that you're serving, that especially the ones with disabilities, to find out access as your bottom rung, so that you as teachers the examples I'm hearing from a lot of teachers are you're really getting very good at engagement virtually as long as the internet stays up. So the whole idea is making sure the kids can access before you start thinking about engagement and working on skills. Next slide, please. Again, and that all that information is in this document, Sustaining Inclusive Practices. So I think I'm turning this over to, guess what topic? Inclusive practices. If we go to the next slides, and how in the world do we co-teach in a virtual setting? So I want to introduce Dr. Teresa Lee, who has taken the lead to pull together a lot of resources and professional development over the past probably 5 years in this area. Dr. Lee.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be with you guys this evening. One of the things that we wanted to talk about was co-teaching in the virtual setting. As you guys know, co-teaching is a special ed service. You can go to the next slide. This is going to be a quickie. Co-teaching is a special education service delivery option, and it is designed to give our students access to the general curriculum in the least restrictive environment, which we believe is the general classroom, with two teachers supporting them, two licensed teachers supporting them. You can go to the next slide. One of the things we tell our teachers is that it is included in the regulations. It is defined. A co-teacher could be together part of the day, some of the day, and they use their expertise to meet the needs of students. One of the things we also remind teachers that you can collaborate without being in a co-taught classroom, but you can't co-teach without collaboration. Next slide. One of the currently our data story, about 68% of our students are spending 80% or more of their day in the general classroom. However, when we look at our achievement scores, only about 50% of our students are meeting the standards for reading and math. So again, least restrictive environments, but we need to up our game as it relates to the instructional component. Next slide. In order to be effective co-teachers, and especially in the virtual classroom, one of the things that we have to do is make sure that we're using the three components of co-teaching. And the first one is co-planning. That co-planning has to be intentional. It has to be set up so that you are definitely addressing the needs of the students. And it should be either, if there's not a common plan in time, there should be a time that our teachers are working together. The next thing is the co-instructing. The co-instructing piece means that teachers need to be, both teachers need to be actively engaged in the instructional practice. We're on camera, so I don't suggest that we use one teach, one assist real often, because we don't know who's watching us on camera. So we are definitely encouraging teachers as they're looking at the instructional approaches to remember that both teachers should be actively engaged in the instructional process. The final component of co-teaching is co-assessing. We should be doing ongoing formative and summative assessments with our students, and especially students with disabilities. We need to be progress monitoring them on a regular basis. So when we're doing it in a virtual setting, that process should continue. Next slide. There are 6 models of co-teaching, and we really want encourage our teachers to use the models that are making your group smaller. First one would be station teaching. Station teaching requires 3 or more small groups. You can have each teacher working with a group of students and a group of students working independently. Parallel teaching, we're dividing our class into half. One teacher's teaching one half of the class, the other teacher is teaching the other half. They can be using the same content, or they can switch and use different content for certain content areas. Team teaching probably would work in a virtual classroom. For one teacher is describing, they're feeding off of each other. Both teachers are working with a large group. Alternative group, and my colleagues that will follow me will talk some about alternative teaching. We can, one teacher can facilitate a large group while we have a breakout group with 4 or 5 students that we're providing specially designed instruction or remediation for. One teach, one assist. We see this often as we move around the state. We strongly encourage teachers not to use this for more than 5 or 10 minutes. And then one teach, one observe. This can be used in terms of data collection, in terms of that progress monitoring. Again, we believe that both teachers should be the one that is teaching or observing, and it's just not the special education teacher all the time. So the next slide. So the high leverage, high use co-teaching models, we believe that you can use them face-to-face in the building, but we believe that it can be done with breakout groups such as parallel teaching, alternative teaching, and station teaching. I know we're using a variety of technology across the state, but if they have the ability to do groupings, we strongly encourage those. Again, small group breakout session, we should be providing that specially designed instruction in those groups. We also should be facilitating those accommodations that some of these students may need, such as word banks or notes or sentence starters, or teaching them strategies, and my colleagues will talk about that briefly coming up. The next thing, the next slide, we talk about students should have, if they're in the co-taught class, and that is the identified disability, they should have goals, and some of them should be standard-based goals. And for example, here, a goal in their IEP should be based on the grade level English standards, as well as functional goals, behavioral goals, math goals if necessary. And then the next piece is that we should provide them specially designed instruction, supplementary aids and services, and that should be done in the least restrictive environment. So again, as you're looking at co-teaching is going to be look different in different places, but we definitely encourage you to use a variety of the models in your practice. The next slide, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Kim Bausum-Brown. She's going to talk a little bit about specially designed instruction, and specifically specially designed instruction for the language arts area. Kim.
Thanks, Teresa. Good evening, everybody. My name is Kim Bausum-Brown, and I'm the dyslexia and specialized reading specialist at the VDOE. I am happy to be here with you this evening. I am sorry that my video isn't working. It's giving me a black just frame when I hit it. So obviously I've got to fix a glitch. I'm really disappointed because I did put up makeup today for you all, which you're not going to be able to see. But I look a lot like, gosh, picture a model or something. Anyway, let's talk about special education. Special education has 2 parts: specially designed instruction and supplementary aids and services. Specially designed instruction means adapting content, methodology, and/or the delivery of instruction. First, it must address the unique needs of the child based on the child's disability, and next, it needs to ensure access of the child to general education curriculum so that the child can meet the same standards every other student in that educational jurisdiction is to meet. Supplementary aids and services are provided in the general ed classes or other educational settings that enable children to be educated with their non-disabled peers, to the maximum extent possible in accordance, with the least restrictive environment guidelines. An example of a support to environment might simply be preferential seating for a student. Levels of, staff supports might include staff providing one-on-one instruction or just consultative instruction. Next slide, please. Thank you. Both accommodations and modifications come under the umbrella of supplementary aids and services. It's important that teachers know the difference between the two. An accommodation is a change to the timing, scheduling, setting, response, or presentation regarding instruction and assessment. An accommodation levels the playing field. It fosters and it should foster independence. Most importantly, an accommodation does not change student expectation in terms of what they are to learn. A modification, on the other hand, is a change in the expectations for a student. Objectives differ from the rest of the class. Typically, content and tasks may be reduced in depth and complexity. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we're going to talk about what does special education, actually specially designed instruction, first look like for students that are identified with a specific learning disability. Next slide, please. So we know that the majority of students with a specific learning disability, such as dyslexia, have a weakness in the word recognition area of reading, resulting in difficulties with developing proficiency in reading, writing, and spelling. Next slide, please. Structured literacy is recognized as the specially designed instructional approach essential to addressing these weaknesses. The content of structured literacy includes phonology, sound symbol relationships, syllabication, morphology, semantics, and syntax. The content is reflected in our Virginia standards. The delivery of the instruction is what is specialized about this approach, and it's based on the following principles. Structured literacy must be delivered in an explicit, systematic, cumulative, diagnostic, and emotionally sound way. There are several programs or approaches that are based on structured literacy, all of which share several lesson plan components. Next slide, please. And these programs and approaches have these components in common. This slide includes some of those components. You'll notice if you put lesson plans of, for example, a Wilson program or Aspire or an IMSC or OG approach, many of the components are going to be very similar, and they're not only similar in their existence, but similar in the order in which they come in. There should be a phonological awareness component. There's going to be a visual drill, an auditory drill. There's going to be a time for teaching of a phonics lesson, or excuse me, a specific phonics skill. There's going to be time to practice reading words in isolation and then in context. There's going to be a spelling component where we're practicing that phonics skill with words in isolation and sentences. And then there's always going to be reading of connected text. I'm highlighting the University of Florida Literacy Institute kind of as my spotlight resource today. It contains videos of using one-to-one small group instruction, in particular for K and first grade level, that I want to bring your attention to. Next slide, please. So the University of Florida Literacy Institute has several videos, and the first one I would recommend going in order. The first one is an introduction to teaching reading online, and yes, that's more comprehensive than our topic of structured literacy, but it gives some great examples of teaching primarily at first and second, or K first and second, which I'll talk about in a minute. It includes a tour of Teaching Reading Online Resource Hub. I'm going to come back to that one in just a minute. It includes tech tools for online virtual teaching, and then it has Spotlight, separates out primary and intermediate grades. Going back to the online resource hub, that's where you're going to find that spotlight on primary grades and intermediate grades. And this is where the University of Florida really hones in on structured literacy. Their teaching of reading in core and tier is a structured literacy approach. So the videos that you watch, K2, are going to reflect that instruction. The resources that you find there are going to reflect that instruction, and you're going to see teachers using that instruction. So I think it's a great launching off point if you need some comprehensive picture and just kind of that launching of reading instruction, specifically structured literacy. If you need a scope and sequence, they also provide that. In addition to, I would encourage you to go outside the hub and look at some of the other huge amounts of resources that the University of Florida offers. But this particular link that I've provided in this PowerPoint will take you specifically to these resources here. Next, So let's spend a couple minutes talking about accommodations for students with a specific learning disability. Oftentimes, those accommodations that you'll see on an IEP would include extended time, use of graphic organizers, alternate note-taking strategies, alternate forms of read aloud options, speech to print assistive technology, and segmenting or chunking of information. Many of you that are familiar or work with students with specific disabilities, you're familiar with several of these accommodations. Next slide, please. So in highlighting now some virtual accommodations, this is a document, Virginia's Virtual Learning and Accommodation Guide. I have a feeling Daniel will talk about this in a few minutes, but I want to highlight and really put a spotlight on this document. This is one of the best documents I've seen in quite a while. It gets all my kudos. It is organized by on the left-hand side with daily accommodations, typical accommodations that you might use. You'll see here graphic organizers, and then on the right column, you're going to see remote accommodations, and you'll see several links that can help you, take you to some sites that are going to help you deliver that accommodation in a remote atmosphere. So I think, and it gives the high tech, and then it also shares some low tech options as well. For example, using Post-it notes as part of that graphic organizer accommodation. So it does cover many of the very common accommodations for students with specific learning disability or dyslexia. So I encourage you to take a look at that accommodation guide. Next slide, please. So now I'm just going to take a quick minute to kind of pull some pieces together. This is a reading goal for a 5th grade student. It's a functional standard-based goal. The goal is about the student learning strategies to decode unfamiliar words. The patterns that the student needs to really work on within the connected text are listed there. And of course, we have the 4 out of 5 consecutive attempts with a measurement of accuracy. So the specially designed instruction that we would use for a student would be a structured literacy approach. Co-teaching model examples Teresa was speaking about earlier might be station teaching or alternative teaching that we're using in that virtual mode, pulling those kids for that group or for that instruction. A visual delivery, again, break out into smaller groups. You might have to offer one-to-one instruction. And I would use the some of the examples that you would see on the University of Florida website, as well as the accommodations we're about to talk about, such as a scaffolded read aloud for this student. Again, a great resource to use would be what I just mentioned, the Virginia Virtual Accommodation Guide. Next slide. Real quickly, this is a student with a specific learning disability, an 8th grader. This is a goal that really focuses on comprehension. The specially designed instruction has a focus of use of the graphic organizers for cause of an effect, use of explicit teaching, including teacher modeling, identification of vocabulary, delivery in the co-taught classroom. Co-teaching model examples might be teaming, parallel, or alternative. Turn that into that virtual delivery. You're going to use possibly breakout rooms to create smaller groups, to create opportunity for more teacher-student engagement. Might be an example or something that a model that you use. Accommodations, I'm going to send you right back to the Virginia virtual accommodation document. Might be for this student clarifying unknown vocabulary, extended time, use again of graphic organizers. So I'm going to end it there. I'm going to turn it over to Kristin Williams. She's going to talk about some math, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Kim. So Kim, if you want everybody to see you with your makeup, you're welcome to just come on, hop over to my house. Kim's my neighbor. It takes her like 3 minutes to walk here. So
okay, all right.
Anyway, I'm Kristin Williams. I'm the mathematics and special education specialist at the Virginia Department of Education. I taught many years as both a special educator and a mathematics teacher. So I have the lens of both practitioners. I'm first going to talk a little bit about some new resources that we have on our website. I'm super excited about them. If you could go to the next slide, please. We've been working on these resources probably for about the past 6 months, and I'm super excited that they're ready for the start of the school year. We have a Learning Disabilities and Mathematics webpage on our website that's totally focused on learning disabilities and mathematics. So there's several resources that are on that page that are from our website as well as outside resources. However, what I'm super excited about are these two documents. We have a frequently asked questions document that highlights the characteristics of mathematics disabilities, as well as information about accommodations, assistive technology, modifications, and so forth. So even though these were not specifically written for teaching in a virtual setting, many of these strategies and accommodations can be applied in the virtual setting. So I definitely recommend that you peruse the frequently asked questions document. And then a companion guide that we have to this is the resource guide, which highlights evidence-based specially designed instruction in mathematics. That seems to be probably one of the biggest questions I get, is how can I provide specially designed instruction in mathematics? So this guide is a pretty lengthy document that highlights 5 specific evidence-based strategies that you can use in mathematics that really hone in on what students with disabilities in mathematics really need. And again, this was not written for a virtual setting, but many of these, in fact, all of these strategies can be applied in the virtual setting. So again, I would love for you to take a look at this if you teach mathematics, or even if you don't necessarily teach mathematics, but you're a case manager and you want to share the resources with the teachers that teach your case manager students. Okay, could you go to the next slide, please? So just thinking about a lot of the things I'm going to talk to you about in the next 5 minutes, I have to go pretty fast, can be found, many of the strategies I talk about can be found in those 2 documents. And again, they can be applied in the virtual setting. So just real quick, this is just in general, this is another question I get a lot is, well, when do you provide specially designed instruction when you're in a co-taught mathematics class? Well, sometimes you need to teach prerequisite skills. You know, some of your students may not have those prerequisite skills that are necessary to learn the content that you're teaching now. That's the time that you might use to specially design instruction. You're going to use specially designed, if your students have any IEP goals in mathematics, you're going to use specially designed instruction to teach those IEP goals. And then you're also going to have to use it if they require a different delivery of instruction. There's a reason they have disability in mathematics, and a lot of times they need a different delivery than the regular ed teachers doing in the general classroom. So those are kind of the three top situations when you really do need to make sure you're providing specially designed instruction. As far as how you would do that in a virtual classroom, you just kind of think about how would you do it in the regular classroom, and how am I going to do it in a virtual classroom? So again, if you have the option to do breakout rooms, that's a really great tool, because you can use breakout rooms for a lot of the different co-teaching models for you to be able to provide that specially designed instruction. An example is, you know, most math classes start with a warm-up. You could do a breakout room and dedicate some specially designed instruction during that warm-up time. If you're doing the alternative teaching model, whether it's the regular ed teacher or the special ed teacher, whoever's taking that small group and working with them on either remediation or specially designed instruction, you can use a breakout room for that. Or if you're thinking about parallel teaching or station modeling, again, breakout rooms are great for that. If you don't have the opportunity to do a breakout room, you could even do a separate video call where you're working with half the classroom in one video call and the other teacher's working with the other half of the classroom in the other video call. So I found this article not too long ago, and I highly recommend that you take a look at it if you're trying to figure out how in the world do I fit specially designed instruction in the regular classroom that I'm co-teaching in. This article provides some great examples of lesson plans and how the specially designed instruction is integrated in that plan. So the example I have on the screen is actually from this article, and it has the left-hand column is what the regular ed teacher is doing, and the right-hand column is what the special educator is doing. But you'll notice they're both flip-flopping on who's doing the large group instruction, who's doing the specially designed instruction, which Dr. Lee kind of spoke to about, you know, the special ed teacher doesn't always have to take the small groups, doesn't always have to be the one who's assisting. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at that article. Let's see here. So like Kim, we just wanted to kind of give you a few examples of, you know, we talked about how when you're going to want to make sure you provide specially designed instruction for students who have IEP goals in that content area. So I just I'm showing you a few examples of standard-based mathematics goals that your students might have and how you could deliver that specially designed instruction in the virtual setting, as well as what kind of accommodations you might think about. So this first example is a standard-based goals for the 4th grade SOL 4.5B, and it deals with adding and subtracting fractions. So if the student needs specially designed instruction in this skill, some examples of co-teaching models you might want to use is either the parallel teaching, the alternative teaching, or the stations. And you might decide that the student could really benefit from being taught the additive schema-based instruction, which, if you don't know what that is, again, I highly encourage you to look back at that resource guide I was sharing with you that details what schema-based instruction is. It's an awesome way to teach how to solve word problems, and it's based on the structure of the problem. It's not based on keywords. If any of you teach keywords in mathematics for word problem solving, please don't do it anymore, because half the time they don't work. So, but especially design instruction and strategy could be using schema-based instruction. Another strategy you might use, and probably more of you have heard of this one, is CRA, concrete, representational, abstract. You might want to integrate some, even though you might not be in person, but you can still use CRA using virtual manipulatives. So you might decide you're going to use some virtual manipulatives like fraction bars, fraction circles, linking cubes. And as far as accommodations go, again, what you would do in the brick and mortar setting, you can do in the virtual setting as well. You might provide a multiplication chart to help the students find the common denominators more easily. You might have a few worked examples that they can model as they're doing their guided practice and their independent practice. The next goal I have is a middle school goal, and this is with practical problems, applying proportions with SOL 7.3. And if you're providing specially designed instruction in this area, again, you can use the parallel teaching, you can use alternative teaching, you can use stations. And the really cool thing is there's also schema-based instruction that has to do with ratios and proportions. So this is really applicable when you get to middle school. Another specially designed instruction strategy is you might teach the student a specific problem-solving strategy, like the understand, plan, solve. And the main thing with teaching students problem-solving strategies is you want to explicitly teach how to use the problem-solving strategy so the student gets to the point where they are constantly using it on their own and following specific steps to solve the problem. Again, accommodations you might think about are accommodations you would use in a classroom, allowing the student to use calculator, showing worked examples that they can model from. The last goal I have for you is an 8th grade example with patterns, functions, and algebra. And this is basically solving expressions, but using order of operations. So some specially designed instruction you might use is the concrete, representational, abstract. And if you're in a virtual setting, using the virtual algebra tiles rather than the physical ones. Teaching a mnemonic. I wonder how many people on this call know what GEMDOS means. Probably some of you know it as PEMDAS, but it's actually GEMDOS because we want to do grouping symbols before we do not just parentheses. But anyway, that's a whole nother different story. You might also decide to as a part of your specially designed instruction, just scaffold your expressions, starting with the more simple expressions, going to the more complex. And for accommodations, an accommodation you would use in brick and mortars, allowing the student to use calculator. And then this other one, which I'm about ready to show you, this is awesome. If you're a math teacher and you haven't heard of Equatio, this is one of the first resources I highly recommend that you go to. And I'm going to share with you what it is, but it's really amazing, and it's free for teachers. So it's a tool that makes math notation accessible. So as you can imagine, especially as you get into higher grades, it's hard to think about mathematics in an accessible format. So I'd highly recommend, oh, I even have a comment that's from somebody that says it works. So awesome. If you go back to my presentation, I show you a couple other resources that support virtual learning. Dr. Abrams talked about the website AIM, but they also have a specific page that just focuses on accessible math. And it gives you an overview of some of the tools that make content more accessible, such as text-to-speech for reading math expressions, handwriting recognition, sonification of graphs, and more. So I definitely recommend going to that. I found MathShare as I was looking for really good resources, and this is another free site. It's an open source tool developed by Benetech, and it is free for schools to use and for learning management. So if you have an LMS or a learning management system, it can be integrated in your learning management system. And then I also have a link in the PowerPoint that goes to the actual document that describes each of the accessibility features. And then the Equatio, which I just talked about. So those three I would highly recommend. So like we were kind of all alluding to, you guys are being inundated with resources, and sometimes it can be really overwhelming. So I tried to pick out the really good ones that you would find some benefit from. The next slide just has some links to some really good virtual manipulative sites. But I'll tell you, if you just go into Google and type whatever virtual manipulative you want, it'll come up with a lot of different websites that have that virtual manipulative. They're pretty easy to find. And then I just wanted to share with you my last couple minutes. Actually, it looks like I'm past time. I need to go really fast so we can get to Daniel. But some of you may have heard about our new just-in-time quick checks. We've had several webinars already describing these. But Teresa talked about in her part of the presentation how it's really important for co-teachers to co-assess and do those formative assessments. So these are actually, we have, they're called quick checks, and they're for every single grade from kindergarten to Algebra 1. And we're working on Algebra 2 and Geometry now. And there's a formative assessment for every single SOL and its bullet. And they're about 5 to 6 questions that that will help you kind of diagnose where your students' unfinished learning is. And the whole idea is that in mathematics, a lot of teachers might think that they have to review everything or try to teach everything that the students may have missed last year. But it's actually better to start teaching at grade level and then filling in the gaps. And using these formative assessments helps you do that. This webpage where we have them all linked, we have links to our webinar recordings that really go into how you can use these effectively. And we also have links to the PowerPoint. So I would highly recommend you, if you teach mathematics, to check these out and learn how that they can be used this year in your classroom. And then the last slide, I just have some other links to resources on our website that you may find helpful. So I'm going to stop talking so that our behavior expert, Daniel Irwin, can finish our presentation.
Hi, thanks, Kristin. It's good to be with you all this evening. There's a lot to talk about, obviously, but I do want to kind of get into behavior and how to support appropriate classroom behavior. And I'm going to talk about assistive technology as well. Next slide, please. So we have to sort of start with some of the general understandings of behavior. And one of those things is that past patterns of behavior shape future occurrences of behavior, right? So we use behaviors that work for us. We don't continue to use those behaviors that don't work for us. And we're in a position now with virtual learning in which some of those previous behaviors may or may not work because the setting is so different, because the environment is so different. And that could be good or bad. As far as students who might engage in some inappropriate behavior in a classroom, that might be squashed out when in an online setting. But for students who have trouble communicating face-to-face or at all, that might be compounded in a virtual setting. And so we really have to sort of take a step back and look at the environment we're in and the behaviors we're trying to shape. Typically behaviors result or reflect errors in learning. And somewhere along the way, either an inappropriate behavior or a behavior that may be disruptive got the student what they wanted, right? We've all developed sort of bad habits along the way. But at some point that behavior was reinforced and essentially taught so we know that they can be untaught and more appropriate behaviors can be taught. And those replacement behaviors need to address the same function as those inappropriate behaviors. So if we're looking at students who are engaging in some level of inappropriate behavior, it's critical that we understand why they're doing it so that we can teach them the appropriate behaviors. We can't make students behave appropriately, right? Like that's not how this works. But what we can do is set expectations, celebrate success, develop relationships, and create an environment in which students want to behave appropriately, right? So we're really looking to increase the probability that they're going to behave and do the things they ought to do, to engage in learning, to engage socially, and to be independent learners. Next slide. Thank you. So when we think about kind of this online learning environment, I've I've been privy to my son's class this week, and his teacher came in with this right up front, and it was pretty impressive. But setting those class-wide expectations. Kids have been in school for who knows how long and have had kind of similar routines, similar expectations, and all of a sudden they're sitting by themselves in front of a computer, looking at other people and thinking all those people are looking at them, and so we've got to really establish what those expectations for online learning are. And one of the things she did kind of the first day was this quick draw, everybody mute. And so she was seeing how quickly every student could mute and made a game of it. He's in 3rd grade. That might not be the most appropriate thing for 11th graders, but it was fun. And she was able to quickly assess those students who were able to do it and those who might have needed some additional instruction to do that. And so part of that is developing and teaching those routines. And so as experienced teachers or as new teachers, you start the school year thinking, okay, this is how my day is going to run. They're going to come in, they're going to put their backpack away, and you sort of get this routine down. And it's physical, and it's great for young learners to go through that kind of this physical routine. And that's not there anymore, at least the way we're kind of used to it. And so as a teacher, we've got to be able to task analyze that and kind of comprehend and put together what we want kind of the beginning of class to look like and what our expectations for students are. But we've also, like I said, we've got to be able to communicate that to students. One of the things we always look for, especially considered with students with autism, and really for any student, especially given that we're in such a unique learning environment, is the use of visual supports. So things like checklists, first then boards, visual schedules that really show the outline of the day and give students a clear way to kind of understand what the expectations are and sort of the sequence of events. So with that schedule, it's really about having it, sticking to it, staying true to it as much as you can, and reminding students that, yeah, we're going to take a break in a few minutes and we just plow through some of this work we've got to do. When it comes to kind of teaching some of these new etiquette rules and how we're going to do class, one of the things that I've always found very helpful is sort of labeling the behaviors and then being able to categorize underneath that what those are. So if we're attentive or we're listening or we're being friendly, there are certain behaviors that sort of fit under those labels that the teacher or you can call out and really say and use those words over and over and over again so that students are learning really clear examples of what these kind of nebulous phrases are. And it gives you the opportunity to kind of categorize these really specific behaviors. Reinforcement, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Finding those opportunities, it's always that catch them being good, right? And so now we're looking for different behaviors that we're considering reinforcing. And so again, being specific and being really specific about what it is you're seeing that you want to see more of. Use that language, use that vocabulary, label the behavior the way you want it labeled in your classroom, and really just be specific, immediate, and at this point in the year, really frequent with it. Really making sure that students are getting a lot of exposure to that positive reinforcement and the labeling of those appropriate behaviors they're engaged in. And then the idea of non-contingent breaks. This is one of the things I think, at least for me, been working from home, and a lot of times the day feels longer because I'm not moving, I'm not in different rooms, I'm not in different meetings with different people. I'm looking at the computer, and one meeting goes until 2 o'clock and the next meeting starts at 2 o'clock. And so those non-contingent breaks being built into the day can really have an impact on someone's ability to be able to sustain readiness to learn. Next slide, please. So when we think about specially designed instruction for behavior, this gets really complex online for virtual learning. It really does. Environmental supports and some of those strategies I talked about earlier are going to work for most students. Most students are ready to learn. They've got the skills they need. They're able to generalize and adapt their skills into new environments. And some students are not able to do that. And so when we start to consider the need for specially designed instruction, we're really looking for those pervasive challenging behaviors that are impacting the learning of the student or learning of others. So as teachers, we all have kind of a bag of tricks that work, typically in a classroom, right? Because that's where we're used to teaching. And when that's not working, or we haven't developed that bag of tricks yet, because this is new to everybody, we really need to sort of dive in a little deeper and figure out, why the student's engaging in the behavior. So another thing to kind of keep an eye on as you see students who you might see them start to escalate or start to engage in new types of behaviors as the year goes on. That's another reason to start thinking about what kind of specially designed instruction may be required to help teach those new replacement behaviors. Next slide, please. So the first thing we've got to do, and this is true wherever we are, is identify the potential functions of behavior. I'm going to talk about those in a minute, but we all engage in behaviors for a reason. And what you might see if you've got students that you're teaching again this year that you taught last year, you might see that there's some of the same behaviors that are happening, whether it's getting out of their seat, calling out, using inappropriate language, and escalating from there. They might be doing the same thing, but in a virtual environment, they might be doing it for a different reason, which means we've got to adjust our intervention. And so it's just another thing to kind of keep an eye on. Even if you had a behavior intervention plan in place, you might need to kind of look at that. If you're not seeing progress, you might need to reevaluate and look at the function may have shifted in a new environment. So it's just something to keep in mind. So once you kind of identify those behaviors that you really want to see change, really setting attainable goals and steps to get there. This is just like any other learning, and it's sort of setting that bar, setting the goal, and then identifying ways you're going to get there and how you're going to teach that new behavior. The functional equivalency piece, I'm going to talk about in a second. But one of the biggest things, and this is in person, this is virtual, and it becomes a little trickier in a virtual setting, is really identifying those meaningful reinforcers. If you haven't found activities, items, or the function of the behavior that's creating the situation in which the student's engaging in the behavior, then you're not going to be able to change the behavior. We've really got to be able to find those things that are meaningful for the student, that they're willing to work for. And for students with more significant needs, this might take a little more work to figure out what's going to motivate them to make those behavior changes. And the other part of this is training the other classroom staff. So Teresa and Kristin and Kim all spoke about co-teaching, but I think this is a good opportunity to, if you have them, engage paraprofessionals in identifying and helping to reinforce appropriate behaviors, to be that person to kind of help catch the students being good, and really kind of creating a level of fidelity of implementation of some of these behavior interventions. Next slide, please. So when we think about functions, if you're going to talk about behavior, we got to talk about function. The easiest way to kind of think about this, and maybe I should have pushed this slide up 2 or 3, is that we essentially engage in behavior to get something or to escape and avoid something. And if we kind of think about it in those 2 ways, if we're trying to get at something, we might be looking to get access to a tangible, some food, an activity. We also might be looking to get some social attention, right? We might be just, all I need is some acknowledgement here and I'll move on with my life. Or we might be trying to get at some sort of stimulation or sensory, listening to music, or I'm standing right now and it's taking a lot of effort to keep my feet still. But some sort of sensory or sensory stimulation. On the other side of that, we might be trying to escape something. So we might be trying to get away from an activity, which is, kind of typical in a school setting. But we also might be trying to get away from social and attention being thrown at us. And that's kind of that idea that reinforcers are very individualized, and we've got to keep that in mind. Some kids do not want to be called out for doing the right thing in public, right? So like there's the phrase, praise in public, correct in private. something like that. Not all kids are going to enjoy being called out for doing the right thing. And so we've really got to be aware of how we're addressing that and addressing students and making sure that we're really actually reinforcing their behavior, not just giving them something we think they'd like. And then there's that avoiding stimulation or sensory experiences. Staring at the screen could certainly be one of those sensory experiences that can drive someone bonkers after a time. And you might see someone walk away or shut it down or otherwise. Next slide. I'm going to try to roll through this. So when we're thinking about maintaining those positive changes, again, when you sort of start with that baseline, you start with those expectations, the routines, the visual supports, it makes it easier to sort of come back to that, right? That's kind of the steady thing that's there. So even if a student is engaging in some off-task behavior, we can always kind of use that foundational stuff, those visuals and expectations, to bring them back and begin the reinforcement process again and really kind of catch them being good once they're back on track. We're looking to elicit them and reinforce them in the natural environment, which at this point feels very unnatural, but the school environment is what it is. And so really finding the opportunities to reinforce. I'm skipping ahead a little bit because I think this provides us a really good opportunity to really consider self-management techniques and getting students to be more aware of and responsible for their own behavior and reinforcement systems. It's a great skill to develop. It's one of the evidence-based practices outlined by the National Professional Development Center. It's a self-management piece, and being able to identify your own behaviors and being able to set up your own reinforcement system like we all do. But there's a very structured way to go about doing that. So I think it's a really good opportunity, given that sometimes we over-rely on paraprofessionals or other staff in the building to manage behaviors. This gives us the opportunity for students to start setting goals and taking some ownership and developing some self-determination related to their own behavior. Next slide, please. So I guess we're running out of time. Accessibility and assistive technology go hand in hand. One of the things that we're trying to push out is this idea of when teachers create materials for classes that are going to be online, making sure that those materials are accessible. They meet accessibility guidelines. And so on the VDOE page, we've got checklists and guidance. So when they're creating Word documents and PowerPoint slides, they're from the beginning, and this is an opportunity for professional development, creating them so that they're going to work with assistive technology. So if students with low vision, students that use screen readers, those materials will work for them. Next slide, please. AT considerations guide. So we look at assistive technology in two ways. One, there's devices, AT devices, and that's just anything that a student might use to access school. The other is the AT service. And so that includes the evaluation, training, and TA for the kid and the family, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. So if you walk away with anything today, the idea that we might need to really reevaluate some of the FBA data we might have on students and the functions there, or the reasons they might be engaging in some problem behaviors, we need to kind of look at it the same way when we're considering assistive technology. And so one of the ways to do that is looking at the SET framework, which is just an acronym for the student environment.
Is that because I was the one in the microwave?
Yes.
So the student hasn't changed. The student's still the student. They've progressed since last year. They're making progress. Great. But the environment is drastically different. Schools are set up in a way that promotes independence from kids. It just by its structure helps kids be successful. That's what it does. And so the environment's different. And so how can we assess the environment and figure out what tools might support a student? The tasks are different, right? And so learning online is not the same as learning in a classroom. There's far less paper pencil. They're going to be expected to be a little more independent in getting tasks done without someone kind of wandering the aisles and keeping them on task. And then what tools are currently used or have been successful in the past, and what might be required to get them moving forward. So just thinking about it from that framework and knowing that many of their tasks and environment have changed can provide some guidance and some information to the team in determining what assistive technology might be appropriate. Next slide, please. So here's a list of resources. Behavior-wise, ODU's got a ton of PBIS modules that are great, short videos that you can learn from. Spotsylvania's put together an FBA workbook that really includes forms and processes for doing a really great FBA. VCU ACE does a Lunch and Learn series that they're going to do at least through the middle of December. It's every Thursday, but the link's there and you can register there. They've also got those archived. One of the things that came out of COVID was this building learning into natural home routines and activities plan. And this is a tool that parents and teachers can use together to really identify where parents are struggling with some of the routines and how to build in, one, instruction and how to complete those routines independently, but two, also how to build in communication and how to build in academics into those routines. So it's not another thing. It's just it's a great tool for helping build that communication between teachers and parents. And then 15 questions to help teachers help parents. You can look at that in your free time, but it's another way to kind of boost the communication between school and home. And next slide, please. Our AT network has been doing a ton of work this summer to support and try to get some information out there. We've got quick tips for families. We've got accessibility videos on the AT network site. Those are super short, but start kind of getting into some of the accessibility features of Google Classroom, Word, Zoom, et cetera, et cetera. The AT considerations guide is still out there. Transfer of AT, if stuff needs to go home, there's some guidance there. If you haven't accessed your regional AT network members, there's a link there that will point you in the right direction for who you need to contact in your region if you need some AT help. And then there's a link for the accessible instructional materials. And I think that's it for me. They always put me at the end and I ended up like saying 1,000 words a minute.
So I know we've had some questions being asked in the chat throughout, and I appreciate everyone that's been answering questions and asking questions. But if you were to have a question afterwards, because I know this is a lot of information to take in, please feel free to reach out to us on social media. And we would like to play middleman and kind of relay those questions to our panelists that we've had today. So you can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter. You can use the hashtag VCEC, VCLD to tag on to the end of your question. And that will notify us that you've asked that question and then we can relay it. So we would like to continue this conversation as you all go to look at these resources, because we know that you can't click every link within this hour and a half, but we really appreciate everyone being here today. And we appreciate the panelists being here as well with all this wonderful information. And we'd also like to talk to you all about what's next.
Again, thank you so much, Dr. Hollins and everyone else from VDOE. It really means a lot to us to kind of really help teachers. I think it's one of the big things with the VCLD and VCEC. We're really trying to put out PDs and webinars that really are at the core of what teachers need in the classroom. I think you guys did a really great job presenting a lot of stuff. Our next webinar is October 2nd. It's going to be on culturally responsive teaching. And it's kind of an exciting thing. In Virginia CEC, a couple months ago, we started a diversity committee. So this is going to be a breakout style webinar by our diversity committee, where each of the breakouts will be different subjects. And if the idea is to really kind of break out into smaller numbers and really talk about the meaning and what is culture responsive teaching. So that registration link is live. You can sign up right now. It's October 2nd from 4:30 to 6.
So thank you all for giving us your time on a Friday afternoon. This was amazing. I'm so excited. I just want to stand up and do a happy dance and sing. And I'm just so excited. I have all these notes on my notepad. I can't wait to share it with my student teachers. So thank you, all of our panelists, from the bottom of our heart. You really nailed it. And you can see in the chat, everybody's saying, this is great. Thank you for the resources. So So everybody will be sharing these resources. And you know, one thing that I think that you did exceptionally well is there are 1,000 resources on VDOE, but you were able to pick, you know, the ones that were most important to you or the most effective or the most efficient. And so you pared it down for our teachers. And in this presentation, you know, you gave them just a beautiful toolbox to use. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And you will, if you click for those of you who need professional development points, if you click, you can request a certificate of completion. And that's it. Lisa, do you have anything to say? Sorry, I just put her on the spot.
No, I'm sorry. Thank you. It was so excellent. I am so excited about some of these resources that I didn't know about. So I am so excited, and I'm excited to share some of those in my classes and with my students. And I just want to say finally, thank you to Old Dominion University for providing us the technology that we use today, the Zoom, and some of the background knowledge that we needed, and to the Student Council for Exceptional Children also, who have helped us. And we hope to see everybody at our next webinar.
Yep, awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much.
Be safe.
All right, thank you.
Have a great night.